Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture. It's time for our weekly Politics of Art segment, where we take a look at the latest art and its impact on politics and how those politics then influence art in return. We're joined this week by Sinclair Skinner, an American engineer, human rights activist, political advisor, serial entrepreneur, and former elected official in Washington, D.C. He is a Bitcoin and blockchain technology evangelist and an advocate of the advancement of African communities in relation to the African diaspora. You can see more of Sinclair's work at www.iloveblackpeople.com. Sinclair, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. I appreciate y'all having me, and I appreciate the conversation.
Well, it's great to have you here. I also live in Ward 1, so I'm well familiar with your work, so it's an honor and a privilege to meet you today. Sinclair, you are someone who has been able to creatively intertwine tech, culture, civil mobilization, and business into a focused political movement. That, to me, is an incredible piece of art. You have a long history that I'd love to dive into, but I wanted to first start with your I Love Black People project and the work you're doing to get out the vote. You have kicked off the I Love Black People campaign to mobilize 500,000 voters in battleground states through wearable fashion. Tell us more about this effort.
Yes, as you can tell, this kind of climate has created a situation with this COVID-19. And I tell people, if you think it was man-made or natural, regardless, it's a very toxic environment. So with that toxic environment, you don't want to put people in harm's way through the typical get out the vote strategies of canvassing and some of the things that traditionally done. So we developed a high-tech, low-touch approach where we focused on Black businesses because they've been disproportionately hurt by not only gentrification, but also this COVID-19. And they're already open. They want people to come in. So what we said is, look, we'll put a QR code on the back of the shirt where people can scan and use that information based on their location of their phone to give them the latest information on registration, latest information on early voting, mail-in voting, as well as absentee ballot application. And that way, people, without even touching anyone, could be driven to drive people to come to the Black businesses, as well as get information about how they can, exercise their franchise. And then including in that, we also even have a Black agendas section. So again, it's not one of those things that just go out and vote and get pimped, but actually something that says, look, we need to use this strategically. Here are some issues, reparations, a host of things that have been long in coming, but allowing our people allowing them the opportunity to get that information so they can make better decisions.
Yeah, I love it because it takes kind of the registration table at the fair and makes it into a movable, wearable, cool, engaging type of process. So I'm curious so far, what has been some of the success stories, some of the challenges? Are people instinctually scanning the QR codes? Are people wanting to wear the fashion that you guys are coming up with? And what are the challenges to this type of kind of switch up, I guess you could say?
I think the biggest challenge, so we identified, so for us, our battleground states are Wisconsin, Minnesota, Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Virginia, North Carolina, Colorado, Nevada, Mississippi, and Florida. So now, and we've included Mississippi because, oftentimes people say, well, the Democratic National Committee has not picked that as a battleground state. Well, as far as our community, as the Black community, we might overlap with some political parties, but we're not going to let them dictate our agenda, nor will we let them dictate what are key states to us. So with that being said, one of the first things was identifying the Black businesses that would actually be able to support the program. So on our platform, I Love Black People, it's much like the original Green Book. It's actually a platform full of Black-owned and Black-friendly businesses. And I think one of the misnomers about the original Green Book, people think it was a Black business directory. It wasn't. It really was a directory of businesses that would treat Black people with dignity and respect and make sure they wouldn't be killed if they were accused of passing a $20 bill that was counterfeit. So with that being the case, our focus is always in this technology about protecting Black people, But in the case of the coronavirus, businesses have been disproportionately impacted. So we wanted to narrow in on Black businesses in these battleground states. And what we found as we started calling through some of the businesses on our platform, many businesses have closed down. So the first barrier to implementation was the fact that under the coronavirus, some businesses were open 7 days a week. Then they went to 5 days a week. Some are 4 days a week. Some are 3 days a week. Some have appointment only. So part of the process was actually, it almost gave us a survey of the real impact of what this coronavirus has done to many of our small local businesses that are Black. So that was the first difficulty, because we had identified, I'd say, over 60 some businesses that we wanted to target. And out of that, we ended up with 38 businesses. So our platform has hundreds of businesses. We got down to 60. Out of that, it ended up being 38. So one of the first things was just identifying businesses that were open and available and not put people in harm's way, like the typical canvasser. You don't want them being exposed to, knocking on doors for political gain. So our thing was matching the interests of those businesses. This would drive traffic, giving away free T-shirts. People love the I Love Black People, excuse the pun, T-shirt. So it has that logo on the front. It's hot. And then on the back, it spells love. And the word love is lead with agendas, O, organize our communities, V, vote our interests, E, elect and stay engaged. And then it has a QR code. So it spells love. It's positive affirmation, uplifting, and at the same time, you get information that's helpful. So I think the biggest hurdle is making sure we had businesses that were available under this. And then as far as scanning the QR code, I think the thing that we've learned with that, if it's the T-shirt or a standalone document, we want to make sure that the QR code is in play so that people can get the information. So the T-shirt has been a good vehicle to get it out because it's wearable and they move around with it. But we also have seen the fact that the QR code is the tech, the shirt is the vehicle. So you want people to think it's hot. So it's great to have it on the T-shirt. But with the 43 days left, what we've also seen is the need to proliferate the QR code in as many places as possible.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I just think it's super creative what you've come up with there, and thinking about fashion as a vehicle to mobilize people to get out the vote is really great. I also wanted to talk to you a little bit about how you see art as a catalyst to political movement. You are someone who often asks what comes after the protest. And for me, that really resonates. I use art as a way to shake people, to get people to reflect and get people to feel uncomfortable, which then leads to a moment where they then have to decide, are they going to take a step forward and act off of that, or are they just going to kind of retreat backwards? In your work with I Love Black People and your new Green Book project and the documentary you did with Tariq Nasheed, how are you answering that? What comes after the protest?
It's always organizing. And I think I'm an engineer by profession, mechanical engineer, and I went to Howard University in Tuskegee. And my sister, though, she was pre-med and decided, without telling my parents, that she was going to get a minor in theater arts at Howard. And when my parents came for graduation, she told them, without me knowing it, that she was going to go to the conservatory in New York and become an actress. Now, my dad almost passed out, like, what? And I'll be candid, I always thought artists needed to go get jobs. Like, I almost thought that they were people who were just lazy. And it wasn't until my sister started to do off-Broadway shows, and we the friends, I got some money together, and we helped executive produce a colored museum. And what I learned about the art through my sister, who I love unconditionally, was that engineers might be able to tell you how big something is, the size, the temperature. We might be able to tell you the density of the air, but no one but the artist is going to tell you about that moment in a way that really connects to the way people feel. They really capture the moment better than any of these scientists. And I think the artists are the ones that will pass down the understanding and context of this moment better than anyone. And I think it's very important for those of us who aren't art inclined or creative is to create an environment where those artists can thrive. And I think as it relates to directly to the point about the protest, I think the temperature, the intensity of our concerns for racial justice, like our intensity of our concerns of where is this democracy really going. I think that really it gets truly reflected in a truly free artist culture where it's not encumbered by the corporate interests who would then, pimp or try to exploit or culture vultures or that type of activity. I think it's important, even if you're not into art, to create a space where people can express themselves and be cuckoo birds and bizarre. I think that's important. And I think whatever, money you make or whatever freedom you call yourself having, if the artists aren't free to express themselves, I think we miss so much in this life experience.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing the tone that artists and music especially plays at protests. I mean, go to a protest with no chants, with no music, and it gets pretty destructive right away. It feels so hopeless. And if you can just bring a simple pot, I mean, I've been to protests, and with a simple pot and a wooden spoon, just hitting ding, 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 all of a sudden awakens people and moves people. And that's what's so remarkable is just a little splash, just a dye in a clear glass of water can completely change the mood and energy that mobilizes people. And so I really appreciate what you have to say there about the role of artists. Sinclair, I also wanted to talk to you a little bit more about, you mentioned you went to Howard University, Mecca there in Washington, D.C., the HBCU tours from the U.S. to Africa and your work to encourage African Americans to invest agriculturally abroad to build wealth and sustainability here. What has been the fruit of all of your labor? What are the challenges? Has it been a challenge with the U.S. Black community in bridging the gap of understanding with continental Africans? And I ask you this from this artist perspective or art perspective, because culture is the underlying connection here between the African diasporas, that there is a shared culture underneath it. It's been separated, it's been stolen, it's been attacked, but underneath there is still some foundational connections that can be made. And that's the power of art, is to spur those histories and to bring the unconscious history to the conscious. So tell us a little bit more about the work you're doing there.
Yeah, I think you kind of really hit it without saying it explicitly. There's a spiritual part that's probably more dominant than we often are told to admit, even as a person in applied sciences. We sometimes want to quantify everything, but just like that dinging of that bell, those vibrations, I think what you start to realize, there's a spiritual and emotional part of this world that will probably inform more of our decisions. I got married 4 years ago, and I used to think the head was more powerful than the heart. And then I had a colleague tell me, well, what do you think determined if you got married? Was your head or was your heart? And I was like, wow. Like literally, it was my heart. Like literally the strength and the power and connecting to that. It's almost sometimes, even as men, this whole misogynistic stuff, we don't want to admit the power of our heart. And to connect to that is probably what even led me to want to try to connect back to Africa. It was the first place I was able to go to while I was at Howard was to Africa. I had always promised myself that I would make it back to Africa. And one of the things that gets difficult, my last name is Skinner, which means somebody literally owned my great-great-great-grandfather and made him be called Skinner, even though I can't go to England and cash a check for Skinner. And then I did my DNA test, and it said this part of West Africa. But then what I realized, whatever DNA test, it doesn't really tell you who they were. Like my ancestors weren't somewhere in South. They were actually, my great-great-grandmama probably had a favorite color. She probably liked to laugh at certain jokes. I will never know who they really are. And when we start talking about reparations and this thing, one of the biggest crimes against humanity that this form of enslavement did was it literally erased my memory. I'll never know them. I think that crime, like I can always make more money. I definitely want my reparations, but I can never make that connection again. And I used to get kind of melancholy about the fact that literally that has been taken from me. Meaning the knowledge of these real human beings that made it so I could be here. And then I finally came to the place where I realized, well, I may not know who they are, but they know who I am. And the sacrifices that they made, they didn't make it for themselves. They made it for me. They could have easily gave up. They easily could have said, man, this stuff's too crazy. But they literally resisted and struggled. And through their struggle, I'm here. And I know they're still present in a spiritual way. And they are here to intercede and help me. So even though I will never know them, they know me. And that's enough. And so now I'm inspired to try to do as much as I can with this moment and to pay it forward for the legacy and the people that come after. And again, as a part of this African diaspora, 1.5 billion people, the size of China, to make this a different space than I found it. And again, coming from my ancestors who know me, but I'll never know, that's my inspiration to try to connect with people I've never met before.
Yeah, it's quite powerful. And where do you find those connections to be the most powerful? I mean, is it just sitting around and people sharing stories? Is it when people go back to Africa and sit with their history and learn more about places they're from? Or is it when you actually kind of get your hands dirty and you start creating businesses and creating the futures that you can better reclaim the past?
Well, I tell folks, especially as one of these silly Americans who only speaks English, and as much as I want to learn an indigenous African language, and I will one day. I'm 51. I will. I'm not giving up. I always tell people sometimes the university environment can be very interesting as a first step. When I say that, meaning that if you're challenged with language, I don't care what part of the world, if you go to a university setting, there's going to be people there who speak English, who come from more of the typical common background. Let me say another way. If you go to a port city or tourist town, you'll meet people who speak English, but they're hustlers. They're folks who are trying to sell something. So you're not getting, it's like somebody coming to America and going to Vegas and thinking that's America. No, that's not America. I'm not in Vegas. I'm gone. But when you go to some of these universities, especially like local universities, you meet some really interesting people, and they come from all walks of life. And I didn't have the money to go to school abroad. So sometimes you meet folks from other countries when you're in school in America. But just like me being in America, not affording to go away for school, I've gone to some of these universities and met young people who couldn't afford to go abroad, but they're serious and they're interested and the conversations are very vibrant. I think, like you said, meeting people who are engineers, my background is engineering, meeting my counterparts, so that not only are we connecting culturally, but we have similar interests. We both are engineers. And the fundamentals of engineering and physics are the same no matter what country you're in. So what I tell people, and what I've done as much as possible, is try to connect with folks around common interests. And then, even if it's like blockchain or Bitcoin, finding something that you have in common that has nothing to do with, what your mama does, your daddy did, or even your degree per se, but common interests can then turn into so many amazing things. And what I love Black people, we don't talk about race. I mean, we talk about race, but we don't talk about class. We don't talk about your background as far as education. We're really coming together to make sure we protect Black people. So for us, even in that, where we say Black friendly, we're now in the process of coming up with a categorization, just like labor-free coffee or organic coffee, where you actually have a category of Black friendly, where we can start talking about what it means to treat people with dignity and respect around racial justice. So again, so much of what we're doing is, in Africa, the conversation oftentimes is xenophobia. Because, everybody Black, so they're like, what do you mean racism? But then in South Africa, and not to single them out, but in many countries, there's xenophobia, that whole other thing. And you're coming to steal my job. And you'll see that even in America. People talk about, there'll be Black folks talking about, well, these immigrants, how is that helping us? Well, Americans' domestic policy and foreign policy are connected. So let's not think that people come over here to cut your grass because that was their dream job. No, they were running from the hell that we created from all those, army bases down in Georgia training these death squads. And now here we go. But anyway, I digress.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I love the stories because you can get into those very real conversations through the path of art. If you need something that can bring people together, can disarm people, let people set aside their preconceived notions, it is art. It's movies, television, fashion, like you're mentioning with I Love Black People. It's those type of mediums that are able to build unity, to even start the process of healing that this planet desperately needs. Sinclair Skinner, we're going to have you back. I wanted to hear a little bit more about BitMari, but unfortunately we are out of time to hear about your Pan-African Bitcoin startup. So we'll have to have you back on. This was a great conversation. Really appreciate the time. Where can people find more of you and your work online?
Yeah, iloveblackpeople.com, or they can reach email info@iloveblackpeople.com. My Twitter is Skinner Liberated. Definitely keep up the work, man. This is the time we need to give clear voices to what's going on instead of this corporate media stuff. So, I don't care if we agree or disagree, but let's have the discourse. And I think what you guys are doing and with the art, I think that's the best educational tool. You know, Fat Albert taught me a lot about what it meant to be a good person. I think the art and how you guys are infusing that with topical information is brilliant. So please continue. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sinclair. We hope to have you back on soon. Yep, you're listening to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, live in DC. We're back after this.